The name of the base is legitimately Seymour Johnson.
That's already a good sign. Today we're going to be looking at Brandon Herrera. Specifically, the US accidentally nuked itself. So, not a planned test. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Tyler Fultz. I'm a nuclear engineer with a little over 10 years of experience in the commercial nuclear power industry. From engineering operations to emergency response. I don't claim to know everything there is nuclear, but I can certainly share some knowledge. Let's check this out.
My old stomping ground of North Carolina is known for many things. Beautiful mountains, relaxing beaches, methamphetamine abuse, and plenty of rich history dating back to before even the founding of this great nation. What you probably don't know, though, is that in the 1960s, the government accidentally nuked North Carolina. Twice. The military,
of course, just to be sure, right?
Literally dropped 2 nukes on rural North Carolina by mistake. And somehow this isn't something that we all just know about. So in this video,
of course not, it's classified.
I'm going to explain what happened, how it happened, and why the Tar Heel State isn't a giant Fallout server. So let's start from the beginning.
It would take a lot more than 2 nukes to do that to North Carolina, even if they did go off, but I understand the sentiment. 1 nuke, even 1 nuke that didn't go off, is 1 too many.
It's the early 1960s, and I'm sure you're aware of what global crisis was center stage during this time period. That's right, John Lennon. But aside from that, we were in the middle of the Cold War.
Confirmed, John Lennon escalated the Cold War.
The United States was in a global standoff with the Soviet Union, trying to stop the spread of communism. It was espionage, proxy wars, and scariest of all, both sides were stockpiling nuclear weapons like it was going out of style. You see, after Oppenheimer did the whole I am become...
He's absolutely right about that. And in the 60s, both sides were really just getting started.
Death Destroyer of Worlds bit, apparently flabbergasted at the idea that his big fucking bomb that was designed to do big fucking bomb things was going to be used against the people it was specifically designed to blow up. Nuclear weapons were...
And they made even bigger bombs than the ones he designed. In fact, during the 60s was the peak in most amount of megatons per nuke, with the Soviets testing the Tsar Bomba, which had over 50 megatons, or over 3,000 Hiroshimas. And they had a bigger one that they didn't even test. That was 100 megatons, because plane wouldn't have been able to escape the blast radius safely.
Emerging as the super weapon of a new age, a nuclear age, an age of fear. And again, the Beatles. So you would think that the United States government, now possessing a...
I've never heard anyone try to attribute the Beatles the same level of crisis, as well as the correlation with their popularity and the rise of nuclear weapons. That's kind of awesome.
Stockpile of these weapons that could potentially, you know, end all fucking life on the planet would be treating...
No, they couldn't. It would take a lot more nukes than even at the peak to do something like that. I talk about this in detail in another video, but the short answer is many millions, even taking nuclear winter into account.
These weapons with the utmost care, ensuring that these weapons would never be treated carelessly in a way that could cause catastrophe and endanger the lives of civilians.
Oh, you'd think so, wouldn't you?
You don't know much about the government.
Yeah, there is way much more care into operating a nuclear power plant, at least now compared to the 60s anyway. But there's much more care into operating a nuclear power plant and handling material that can be hazardous, but nothing like the potential to cause nuclear explosions. And the safety systems and risk assessments, serious flaws led to this event taking place.
Today we're talking about the time that America accidentally dropped a thermonuclear warhead on Greenland. Once upon a time in 1960, during the Cold War, America would receive intelligence that the Soviet Union had upwards of 300 intercontinental ballistic missiles. This meant that theoretically the Soviet Union had enough ICBMs to be able to take out every American airfield all at once, meaning that...
Now that's a more realistic assessment. Yeah, that's the threat isn't ending all humanity, but yeah, completely, crippling the US military and the ability to fight back. Yeah, that's the more realistic, terrifying scenario.
America would not be able to scramble planes to go and return the favor, which violates the entire concept of the Cold War. The Cold War only remained cold due to the concept of MAD, or mutually assured destruction.
Z-bombs and Y rockets. What would those even be? Is he referring to 0-point energy? So that's purely theoretical, or the lowest possible energy state a quantum mechanical physical system can even have. And we don't even know if such a thing could be harnessed, proven to be extractable for a practical use, let alone converted into some type of doomsday weapon. There are some speculative physics models that say it could exceed any known energy source, so you're a weapon if such a speculative thing were even speculatively possible, then maybe you could get it into something crazy like gigaton or teraton range, but this is all science fiction at this point. So clearly just a joke.
Now, there's no longer mutually assured destruction, so America is open to a nuclear strike, and they need to do something immediately. Which is when the Air Force chimed in and is like, hey, I have a terrific idea. Let's take our new bomber, the B-52 Stratofortress, aka the Buff, which clearly stands for Big Ugly Fat Fuck. We're gonna throw a 1.1 megaton thermonuclear warhead in the back, and then we're just gonna do hot laps around all of North America 24/7, all day, every day. And then if there is a nuclear strike, our nukes are already in the air.
Talk about a job where your pilots and your crew would just be really complacent, flying around with a dangerous weapon in the back. I wonder what human performance tools they're going to use to stay engaged.
That plane will make a beeline to the USSR and they'll return the favor. To which the US government is like, wow, what a terrific idea. I'll take 12. They are now going to take 12 B-52s with 1.1 megaton thermonuclear warheads on board.
1.1 megaton is a sizable nuclear weapon. A lot of multi-megaton nukes have been retired by now, but this was the 1960s, the era of let's put a lot of power into one warhead.
And just do hot laps around all of North America every minute of every hour of every...
I love the name Chrome Dome.
every day between 1960 and 1968, and we're going to call this Operation Chrome Dome. For 8 fucking years, the U.S. government is going to have 12 Buffy the Forehead Slayers doing death donuts around North America, carrying 1.1 megaton thermonuclear warheads, okay? And then they...
How many is each of them carrying? Two. Because B-52s are big. They can carry more than one for sure.
Went ahead and decided to call it Operation Chrome Dome because nothing says we're about to put nuclear warheads on foreheads like the phrase Chrome Dome.
Gonna get Chrome Dome.
You might as well
with a
call
nuke.
it Operation Glass your entire country. And I know what you're thinking, but wait a minute, the Cold War didn't end until 1991. Why on earth did this mission stop in 1968?
Yeah, come on, if you're gonna do this for decades.
Oh, it's because we accidentally dropped one of these nukes on Greenland. Yeah, while one of the B-52s was going around the east side of Canada, the heater malfunctioned, so one of the pilots had the brilliant idea that he was going to open up the vent to bleed heat directly from the engine manifold into the cabin to warm them up. Well, it proceeded to get so warm that it literally caught the upholstery of the chairs they were sitting on fire, lighting the entire cab on fire. All the pilots have to bail out. The plane goes down.
That is the most ridiculous plane. Why would you even have something in there? How did they even... Okay, I'm just going to keep going. There's probably a rant about aviation safety in there too, but okay.
Then the conventional aspects of these nuclear bombs blows up on impact. The nuclear part didn't explode, thankfully. However, the conventional explosion was enough.
So I don't know all of the safety systems that go into nuclear weapons. I don't have a security clearance or anything. And I'm not sure how many of these applied back in the 60s. But they do have things like environmental sensors, such as altitude, acceleration, temperature. So that would only arm if it's in a position where it's being dropped from an aircraft. Because after all, these weapons are designed to explode as an airburst, not when they're actually on the ground. That actually maximizes their destructive potential. There's access codes, even remote disabling access if, say, a weapon fell into the wrong hands. I don't know if that existed back then. There's both electrical and mechanical interlocks that prevent it from going off, as well as something called the one-point safety, which if the plane accidentally crashes or there's some other adjacent explosion, it's not going to explode in a nuclear yield.
To spew radioactive material all over the fucking place. Because of that, a bunch of people got exposed to radioactive material, sparking a huge political controversy because Denmark, the owner of Greenland, comes out and they're like, the fuck? You're not even supposed to be here with nuclear weapons. What is happening right now? To which America kind of just replied, I mean, yeah, but also, we're America and you're Denmark. Fucking get over it. And then pretty
stellar foreign policy.
Much nothing happened from there, other than America ended Operation Chrome Dome. Thankfully, however, this was the only incident in 8 years. Well, except for that time we dropped a couple on North Carolina. And then that other time we dropped a couple on Maryland. And then that time we dropped some in California. And then there was that whole thing where we dropped some on Spain.
There really are so many incidents. This happens so often, there's even a word for it called a broken arrow. That can include things from an accidental detonation to incidents where you can drop a bomb but it doesn't go off, loss of a nuclear asset in transit, and there's a whole bunch of other them. And there's been 32 documented cases, according to Wikipedia anyway. There's probably been a lot more. There's probably been more in other countries too. It's a mess that you even need to make a term for it.
But I think Brandon's going to tell you about those. So thanks for watching. Quack Bang out.
Thanks, Nick. I'll take it from here.
Too.
That's my buddy, the Fat Electrician. He's one of actually my personal favorite creators and a great channel for those of you guys who also love military history.
I agree. If you want to see my reaction to another video involving Nick, the Fat Electrician, about a quote-unquote harmless nuclear test, please check it out.
As for the Spain thing, yeah, we did do that.
That reaction.
Dropped a couple of nukes on Spain, contaminated the area with plutonium, and then lost a fourth in the ocean for a while.
Fortunately, the contaminants from, say, plutonium and from a non-detonated nuclear weapon are not going to be that severe. I mean, we were not talking like a Chernobyl type event, but still, the very principle of violating a nation's sovereignty and having an accident that caused any levels of contamination is still unacceptable.
The 60s were not a particularly good time for some of our diplomatic relationships.
The 60s weren't good to you, were they?
But anyhow, this video is specifically about the North Carolina incident because, to me personally, I think it's one of the wilder ones. Maybe we'll talk about some of the other ones later. I don't know. It's up to you guys.
Oh, and that's the mentioning from Wikipedia right there.
Let me know down in the comments what you guys think. After all, it's about what you guys want to see. Anyhow, back to story time. So the year is 1961, around midnight of January 23rd. A Boeing B-52 Stratofortress was flying over eastern North Carolina. This B-52 was based out of Seymour Johnson Air Force Base. The name of the base is legitimately Seymour Johnson.
That's already a good sign. You can't make this up, can you?
If you've never heard of it, you've just made the same joke in your head that everyone who was stationed there has made at some point. Anyhow, the payload that this particular B-52 was carrying was 2 Mark 39 nuclear bombs. There's some pretty serious hardware. These things weigh in at about 6,500 pounds apiece, or approximately 4 times as much as the average Austin feminist. These bombs had an explosive yield of 3.8 megatons.
Yeah, this is the 60s, the era of multi-megaton nukes, and they were a lot more common.
Doesn't sound too crazy, right? For those who don't know, 1 megaton is equal to 1 million tons of TNT. Not a million pounds, a million tons of TNT. The bomb that the United States dropped on Hiroshima that, depending on the source, killed around 100,000 people was only 15 kiloton. That means that the bombs we accidentally dropped on North Carolina were about 250 times more powerful than the one we used to fucking end World War II. And this B-52 was carrying fucking 2 of them. Something worth nuking once. So back on the
nuclear double tap
ranch, the B-52 was getting an aerial refueling. Aerial refueling, if you're not familiar, is when a mommy plane and a daddy plane love each other very much. So the daddy plane, yeah. Basically, it's a way of...
I'd see it as more of a daddy plane or a mommy plane feeding a baby plane, though in this case the B-52 is a big baby, so I guess that doesn't work either.
Transferring fuel from one plane to the other to make sure that the plane that's being refueled doesn't have to land. It can just keep flying. But it was during this aerial refueling that the commander of the B-52 was informed that there was a fuel leak. Ground control was immediately informed of this leak, and the B-52 was instructed to abandon the aerial refueling.
Should be. Fuel leak on which end? I'm not an aviation expert, but you would think on the KC-10 or whatever's refueling the B-52 would have like an emergency cutoff if there is a leak in the refueling line. Though this all depends where the leak is.
And then go into a holding pattern off the coast of North Carolina to burn off the majority of its fuel. The only thing worse than an emergency landing of a giant aircraft is the emergency landing of a giant aircraft with 100,000 pounds of fuel on it.
And it's got a couple of nukes on there. But again, the nukes, I don't know as much about the design of the ones in the 60s, but they should have some fail-safes in there. Should.
Suboptimal. That, and if something bad happens while it's in the air and it goes down off the coast. So you get more of like a Spain situation and less of Nagasaki Episode 2 Attack of the Clones. Well, the problem was when they got into position to begin this holding pattern, they realized that their problem had worsened. They had lost something along the lines of 37,000 pounds of fuel in 3 minutes. They were basically leaking 2 Ford F-150s weight in fuel.
That's a big
every
leak.
60 seconds. Yes, Americans will use literally anything but the metric system. The crew knew that this was not sustainable and the plane was going down, so they tried turning back around. The only thing that these men wanted was to get back to Seymour Johnson. I'm sorry, I'm done, I promise. It quickly became clear that this plane was not going to make it back to base. This is when they decided to abandon the plane and bail out. Out of the original crew of 8, 1 didn't survive the parachute landing and 2 died in the crash, leaving 5 total survivors. Interestingly enough, the 3rd pilot, Lieutenant Adam Maddox, became the only person to ever successfully bail out of the top hatch of a B-52 without an ejection seat and survive. Not only did he survive, he went on to live a long, happy life. The plane itself ended up breaking up in mid-air about 1,000 to 2,000 feet above the ground. This left a debris field over a roughly 2 square mile area around Faro, North Carolina, which is like 20 minutes northeast of Goldsboro. The debris, of course, included, well, the 2 devices specifically designed to level entire cities. So what happened to the 2 nukes? Good news and fucking horrifying news. The good news is, miraculously,
they didn't go off.
Neither bomb detonated. One of them was able to...
They wouldn't have been able to keep this a secret if the nukes actually went off, especially considering how powerful they were. Well, I don't know. I mean, I know this is the government we're talking about, but that would take some next level covering up skills.
Parachute in a controlled manner down to the ground and was found standing upright with his parachute caught in a tree. The other, in a less controlled manner, slapped the earth at Mach fuck and buried itself. Thankfully, without detonating or even setting up the conventional...
I'm gonna have to remember that one. I just love Brandon's delivery of this story. Great storytelling, just very, very calmly phrases something, and yet he says things like that that absolutely crack me up. The duality of him and Nick is good too.
Explosives within the bomb itself. So neither bomb exploded and no innocent people on the ground were hurt. It's no big deal, right? Well, that leads us to the fucking horrifying part that
Even if nothing happened with anything, that's still a big deal as far as safety protocols, potential contamination, cleanup, incident response. So no, even the best case scenario is still not nothing in this case.
I'd mentioned earlier. This is the part that, for me, reading into this, made this particular case so interesting. Based on the information that was recently declassified in 2013, we now know that both bombs almost detonated.
Wow. And this is the other thing. So there is a massive time gap between when things get declassified and when they actually happen. So that 32 number, I fully expect that number to rise as more things get declassified. And then there's the pool of things that would probably never be declassified.
Pretty much by all means should have leveled that part of eastern North Carolina. You see, as you might imagine, there are a number of safety mechanisms on a nuclear bomb.
True.
Depending on which report you read, there were either 4 or 6 safety mechanisms on these particular bombs. Why there's a discrepancy on that? Your guess is as good as mine. Here's the
probably varying levels of what's classified and different counts.
Fucked part, though. All of the bomb safety mechanisms were tripped and ready to blow, except for one.
Dude.
Now that is an oh fuck moment, but don't worry,
All right, so to give you a sense of how things are done in the civilian nuclear industry, the plant I worked at had 3 independent safety systems. One of them by itself could safely shut down the nuclear plant, and even under an accident scenario, could safely keep the core cooled, covered, properly reactive, no issue. But I'm not talking about a nuclear explosion. I'm talking about an accident at a nuclear power plant, which the impact is infinitely less than a 3 megaton nuclear bomb. Even Chernobyl, the worst ever nuclear accident that did not have said safety systems, they had them defeated, did not cause anywhere the amount of destruction compared to a 3 plus megaton nuclear weapon. If just one of those safety systems needs to be, say, shut down for maintenance or taken out of service for any reason, the plant enters what is called a limiting condition for operation, which means that issue needs to be fixed or resolved in less than 7 days, or you have to shut down the plant. If you lose 2 of those, you have an hour to bring at least one of them back. That is something that is taken very seriously and documented within the industry and is very heavily regulated.
Gets worse. The one safety that didn't fail was different on each bomb. That means there wasn't just one Chad well-built safety mechanism on this thing and a
Yeah. From an engineering standpoint, that is terrifying, because that means the same event could have easily defeated all of the safety systems somehow. He didn't mention if some of the safety systems were disabled before or after the crash, but either way, safety systems should be diverse and independent. By diverse, I mean activated in different ways, and independent in that activation of one will not activate the other. Crazy.
Bunch of jank ones. These 2 doomsday devices didn't go off because of fucking luck. That's like 2 people playing Russian roulette with 5 out of 6 cylinders loaded, and somehow both survive. Anyhow,
and I don't know what the failure methods are, so sounds like he's exaggerating. I hope he is, but he might not be.
First bomb that was standing upright with the parachute and all that was basically intact, so that was an easy recovery. So the recovery team was able to disarm it and...
Well, that's also good in terms of contaminations. It should be isolated to the intact bomb if you're worried about, say, plutonium going somewhere.
Send it on its way to... I actually have no idea where you send a slightly used nuke that just survived a crash landing. But the government took it somewhere safe, because you don't want to lose one of those. Again, the second bomb was a different story. It had broken apart in impact and was stuck in a pretty deep hole that it dug by lawn darting itself into the earth. It was so deep that the tail was the first part that was found, and that was found 20 feet down. And in digging around trying to find the rest of it, they accidentally hit an underground water reservoir.
That's not good. So in order to search for it, you could use things like Geiger counters. They don't really tell you what you're looking for, so they're not specifically designed for plutonium, but they could detect basically if any contamination's there. Contamination being radioactive material that you find that shouldn't be there.
Which couldn't have made their job easier. Upon finding the majority of the second bomb, Lieutenant Jack Revell, who's the EOD officer in charge of recovery at the time, was quoted as saying, "Until my death, I will never forget hearing my sergeant say, 'Lieutenant, we found the arm safe switch.' And I said, 'Great.' He said, 'Not great. It's on arm.'" So, yeah, that's pretty sketch. I figure now's a pretty good time to give you a little context for where we're talking about here. In the year 1960, around 28,000 people lived in the city of Goldsboro alone. Had these devices gone off and leveled the town, instantly the death count would have been 10 times that of 9/11. And most locals don't even know that they were one sketchy rocker switch failure away from it. So, like most Cold War stories of
this would have been even worse if this occurred in an even more populated area, just because it takes time for incident response teams to arrive, and then suddenly if you were in a packed area with 2 bombs just showed up, even if just like in this scenario they didn't go off, I could only imagine the added chaos, and good luck covering that up.
Catastrophic government fuck up, we have a bit of a government cover-up story. Because, of course.
Yeah.
So, the second bomb was never fully recovered. The thermonuclear stage of the bomb was basically left intact, although they did take the pit, or the core.
So the thermonuclear stage is basically the fusion stage, the part that gives this multi-megaton weapon the vast majority of its destructive power. So fusion is very difficult to sustain, and it isn't. The fusion reaction goes away very quickly in the form of a bomb. Now, to get to the fusion stage, there is a fission stage, which creates the temperature and pressure that's hot enough to induce nuclear fusion. So the fusion stage is less hazardous and basically inert if it's just by itself compared to the fission stage.
This is the part that contains the uranium or plutonium that makes the nuke do
the core, yes.
Nuke thing. So with the core in hand, the government just called it good. Left the rest of a nuclear weapon just chilling in the ground. Just a reminder,
it technically would be okay, but still, that just reeks of sloppy. You'd think they'd even just take, they would take the fins, part of the fuselage of the weapon, just for the sake of, recovering the whole thing, but I don't know.
A lot of the things I'm talking about here were just declassified 10 years ago. Letting it slip during the Cold War that the feds were losing nukes routinely and then just leaving half of them around because they got tired of digging. Not a great look. The Army did, however,
the expression close enough for government work comes to mind.
Purchase a 400-foot diameter easement on the property and forbid any structure from being built on top of it. Although they did say that
I guess they thought that was less expensive than recovering the whole thing. Weird.
Area is okay for farming. Farming on top of an almost live nuclear weapon.
Well, it's not almost live at this point, and it doesn't contain radioactive contaminants, though the bits and pieces, the bomb, I'm not a farmer, but even just having bits of metal there probably isn't gonna make farming easy.
I mean, this isn't nearly as bad as Chernobyl levels of government cover-up, but it's So
Chernobyl, the thing is, they would have covered that up, but they couldn't because they were setting off high rad alarms in Scandinavia. That, and given how the Soviet government was structured, it might be debatable, but you could argue that the Soviets were just better at covering up, but in Chernobyl, nobody's covering that up. It's just too big.
Alarmingly similar in tone. Now, this last bit I absolutely have to mention because I think it's fucking hilarious. It's like the perfect cherry on top of this story. This is the historical marker that marks this incident. This...
Why? Why?
Is fucking hilarious. This was almost the worst nuclear disaster in human history. And the only reason you would ever know it happened is this little plaque that makes it sound like it is absolutely not as big of a deal as it.
Yes, this little plaque, and we're gonna go ahead and abbreviate 3 miles south because we don't want to spend the additional money to make the sign a little bit bigger. We're not even going to acknowledge the names of the 3 crewmen that lost their lives. This is getting more disgusting the more I look at this thing.
It definitely was. So yeah, that's how an entire section of North Carolina almost received a Darwin Award at the hands of the federal government. The same government that still has control over our nuclear arsenal and loses these things so often that they have a fucking term for it. Broken arrow. More.
A saying circled around by the reactor operators that I worked with, and a lot of them were Navy nukes, and there was a saying that nuclear reactors on submarines are designed by geniuses to be operated by idiots, and the converse is for the commercial industry, that nuclear power plants are designed by idiots to be operated by geniuses, referencing how hard it is to gain reactor operator licenses. I have a senior reactor operator license, and it was a bit like getting a master's degree. And while I do have issues with that statement, I wonder if it kind of sheds a bit of light on operational safety, anyway, in the commercial industry versus the military.
Like missing doomsday device, but, hey, cool name.
I really like the delivery style. Thanks so much for the recommendation on this video. I really appreciate it. And thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.